attraction for me. For the dear Lamb of God left his glory above to bear into dark Calvary. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. To the old rugged cross I will ever be true. Its shame and reproach gladly bear. Then you'll call me someday to my home far away, where his glory forever I'll share. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. You need an introduction here? Probably not. I'm usually referred to as the other Gary. So now I have a problem, you know where it came from. Good evening, church family. In the 1920s, there was a golfer, pro, semi-pro, and his name was David Mulligan. How many golfers do we have in here? You probably know what I'm getting ready to talk about. He had coming up on a big match and he didn't have a chance to warm up. So he goes out anyway on the first tee and he smacks that ball. Went over there somewhere, never even found him. He calmly picks up another ball, places it on the tee, smacks it right down the ground. Looked at his playing partners and said, just take your corrections. So this hereafter was called a mulligan, where you take an extra shot or you get a second chance at something. Why sometimes people call it mulligan. Our God has several descriptions. God of love, God of mercy, awesome God. I think we could probably easily add God of forgiveness and second chances. The Bible is full of places where God gave forgiveness and second chances. We're going to look at a few of them tonight. They're all going to be stories that we're familiar with. We may have looked at them in a different light. So a lot of times when we read the Bible, we hear stories. We look at the ending, we look at the results, but we don't look at what got us there. We start out and either following in your Bibles. I'm going to be jumping around a lot, but I'll try to keep you at Bibles where I'm headed. In Genesis 16, 1 and 2, we talked about Sarai and Abram. Sarai was unable to conceive a child for Abram. This was a very bad situation because God had promised Abram that his descendants would be a mighty nation. It was also bad for Sarah because she was looked down upon by people in the neighborhood as being a barren woman and not able to conceive. She didn't do it God. She decided, like a lot of us do many times, we'll just take care of this myself. So she had a slave named Hagar, and she offered Hagar to Abram, and thought that if Hagar conceived, she would have Abram would have an heir. Abram also forgot to trust in the Lord and took her up on the deal. After 10 years of living in the land of Canaan, he slept with Hagar. She conceived, bore a child called Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old at the time. Once Hagar had the baby, she thought she was top dog in the household. And you can imagine what a problem this was between her and Sarah. And she was mean to her, and Sarah was mean to her. And Sarah had had enough of it. She went to Abraham and said, hey, you got to get rid of this girl. He said, she's your slave, you take care of her. So she was extra mean to her, drove her out into the desert. But the Lord intervened and talked to Hagar in the desert and told her that Ishmael would be the father of many descendants. Ishmael had 12 sons, and so he had many descendants. Tradition says that Muhammad was a descendant of Ishmael. Again, that's tradition. The second chance comes along when Sarah is 90 and Abraham is 100. She conceived just as was God's original plan and had a child. And this was their son's name was Isaac. And he was the first true descendant of Abraham. So this is the second chance that Abraham and Sarah got. We advance a little further up into Exodus 2, 11 and 12. We'll talk about Moses a little bit. We think of Moses as a baby that was put in a reed basket, sealed with pitch, placed in the Nile River where the Pharaoh's daughter often bathed. She found him, pulled him out of the basket, and raised him as her son. He delivered the law to the people. He delivered them out of bondage in Egypt. He led them into the promised land. But when he was a young man, he was walking among the Hebrew slaves, his people, and he saw an Egyptian beating on one of them. He was highly angered. He looked around, nobody was watching. He killed the Egyptian and hid his body. A day later, he was walking among his people again, and he saw two Hebrews fighting. And he asked them, why would you want to fight a fellow Hebrew? Why would you want to hit a fellow Hebrew? And one of them, said, what are you in charge of us? What are you going to do? Kill us like you did the Egyptian yesterday? Well, then he knew that the word was out. Pharaoh found out about it, and he fled to Midian. If we went to this, branded him as a murderer. So it's a little different than what we actually think of Moses as a great leader. He was actually a murderer. In Exodus 3, 2 through 13, we have the burning bush experience. Moses was 80 years old at this time. We won't go into that whole lot. He saw a burning bush. It wasn't consumed. He went to check it out. And God called him and told him he wanted to bring his people out of Egypt. He led the people around the wilderness for some time. And he went to Mount Sinai to talk to God. This is where God gave him the first tablets of the law. While he was up there, the people were gathered around at the foot of the mountain. They were waiting on him to come back. He had been up there a long time. There was a lot of lightning, thunder on the mountain. They thought, gee, maybe he's dead. And so they reverted back to their Egyptian knowledge of idol worship. Tau was an Egyptian idol. They made a golden calf and they were worshiping it when Moses was coming off the mountain. He saw this, was highly angered, and broke the tablets of the 10 Commandments. In Exodus 34, 1:3. The Lord said to Moses, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be ready in the morning and come up on Mount Sinai. Present yourself to me there on top of the mountain. No one is to come with you or be seen anywhere on the mountain, not even the flocks and herds that may graze in front of the mountain. In 34:10, the Lord said, I'm making a covenant with you. Before all your people, I will do wonders never done before in any nation. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. Obey what I command you today. This was the second chance that Moses got to deliver the 10 Commandments to the people that he had broken to start with. If we go on to Joshua 2:1-21, we'll read about Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute, probably a madam, by house builder. She went from being this prostitute to a believer in God and helped her people and the spies that had been in the land. In Joshua 2:1, we read that Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim, go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told that they were in town, they were spies, and he sent men to Rahab's house to get them. He said, we know they're there. They came to visit your house. And she said, yes, that's true. They did. But right before the gates were closed, they went back out. And they haven't been gone very long, so if you start right now, you may be able to catch them. Does anyone have any ideas on how they knew the spies were in Jericho so fast? They weren't from that part of the country. They may have been stressed a little bit. This is just a question I've always had in my mind. They may have had an accent that was different than the people of Jericho. But the woman had taken and hidden them. Rahab had hidden them under flax that she had drying on the roof. And before they lay down at night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that great fear of you has fallen upon us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea for when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites, east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed. For the Lord, your God, is God, in heaven above and earth below. She recognizing that the Israelite God is the God, the only God. In verse 12, she says, now, then please swear to me by the Lord that he will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. They replied, with our lives for your lives. The men assured her, if you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So they waited a respectable amount of time, and she let them down the wall with a rope out a window from her house. And she hung a scarlet cord out her window, which was the sign that she and her household would not be hurt whenever Jericho fell. Again, here is a prostitute, probably a man that went from recognizing God as the true God, and in the process saved herself and her family. We will look at Judges. In Judges 16, we will read about Samson. Samson was a bit of a scoundrel, and he was given a lot of physical strength by God through the length of his hair. Every time the Philistines got into a battle with him, well, he killed several of them. So they had tried various ways to find out what his strength was, where it came from. But they got to a woman that he had fallen in love with. Her name was Delilah. You know most of the story. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can find out where this guy's strength's coming from. And if you can capture him, overpower him, and we will each give you 1,100 shekels of silver. So she harassed him and harassed him, wanted him to die, and tried to get the secret of his strength. But he thought he'd play with her a little bit. And first he told her, if you tie me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then we will be able to break you loose. So she did, and she yelled out, the Philistines are upon us. And he jumped up, broke his bonds, and killed a few of them. So then the second story he told her, after she had harassed him for a while, was to tie him up with new ropes that had never been used. She did. Same results. He killed a few more Philistines. The third thing that he told her was, if you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten with the pin, I will become weak as any other man. That didn't work either. He pulled the pin out, broke loose, and killed a few more Philistines. Delilah is really beside herself now. She knows she's got this guy, but she can't get the information that she wants from him. So she tries to make him feel sorry for you. He made a fool of me in front of my people. And, I'm embarrassed. So we get to Judges 16, 17 through 20. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazarite, dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, I would become as weak as any other man. She told the Philistines, they seized him, bound him, hold him to Gaza, gouged out his eyes, and paraded him around town about, look what we did. After that, they put him into prison, and he was pushing a mill wheel, grinding grain. Time passes, his hair grows, and the rulers of the Philistines are going to have a big party. They're gathering a few thousand people in the temple, and they are going to have a sacrifice to Dagon, their God. And they're celebrating, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. Like, our God is better than his God. Samson was taken out of prison and put in the temple on display. He was placed between 2 of the columns in the temple, and he prayed to God in Judges 16, 28, 30. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. With the power of God, he was able to shove the columns out of the way, enough off center that the roof fell. Many thousand Philistines were killed, and along with Samson, he got his second chance. We go to Jonah 2, 1 through 10. Everybody's familiar with this story. Jonah was supposed to go to Nineveh in Assyria. Assyria was Israel's greatest enemy. And here God is telling him, go preach and tell these people how evil they are, how bad they are, and how God's going to destroy them. That would be suicide as far as Jonah was concerned. So he headed for Tarsus. by way of Joppa, where he got into a boat. On the boat, God brought up a big storm, and the boat was about ready to break up. The crew decided to cast lots to see whose fault this is. They cast lots. Jonah was the guy that they decided was at fault, so he was in the hole. They went down in the hole and said, "Pray to your God so this storm will stop." Jonah said, "They won't do me any good. Pray to my God because I'm running away from it." The crew didn't take that too kindly, so they threw him overboard. 5 things happened when he was thrown. Number 1, a big fish swallowed him. He prayed to God. God had the fish vomit it out. Jonah ended up in Nineveh, and he preached that they were evil, that God was going to destroy them, just like he had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. The people of Nineveh and the king repented, and God had mercy on them, forgave them, and spared the city. Because of Jonah's prayer, Jonah people of Nineveh were given a second chance. If we're in a rough situation and we pray, the earnest of our prayer, God will give us a second chance. God will forgive us. Probably most of us will wait until God is the last possible answer before we give this prayer. But we can pray at any time, anywhere, and ask for God's forgiveness. Sometimes we may think that we have committed a sin that is so grievous that God will not forgive us. I mean, it's just too much. But we would have to look far and wide to find somebody that was worse than King Manasseh. In 2 Chronicles 33, 1 through 20, we read about Manasseh, the king of Judah. He was the one that was 12 years old whenever he came and reigned for 55 years. Something I thought was interesting, the second verse in that chapter starts right out. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Some of the things that he did was he followed the practices of the nations that had been driven out before God had brought the Israelites into the country. He erected altars to Baal. He made astral poles. This astral pole was a idol or a pole made out of wood to the Canaanite fertility goddess. And this astral pole has not plagued Israel for many years. He bowed down to the star gods. He put altars in the temple to worship the star gods. In both courts of the temple, he built altars to the star gods. He sacrificed his children in the valley of Ben-Haran in the fire. He practiced witchcraft, sought omens, consulted mediums and spirits. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord. He even made an image that he took to the temple and placed in the temple. God had said, "I will not again make the feet of the Israelites leave the land assigned to their ancestors, if only they will be careful to do everything I commanded them concerning all the laws, decrees, and regulations given through Moses." But Manasseh led Judah and the people that God had destroyed before they came into the land. The Lord spoke to Manasseh and the people. They paid no attention. So he sent the king, the battle people, the army, the kingdom of Assyria. Took the land, conquered them, took them back. Took Manasseh prisoner, put a hook in his nose so they could lead him around. They bound him with shackles and took him back to Babylon, led him around and showed him off as kind of like their prize cow, whatever. In his distress, he sought favor of the Lord and humbled himself greatly before the God of his ancestors. And when he prayed to him, the Lord was moved by his entreaty and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem. At this point, Manasseh knew God was God. Afterward, he rebuilt the outer wall of Jerusalem. He put commanders in all the walled cities. He got rid of the foreign gods, removed the images from the temple, got rid of the poles, and so on and so forth. The people, however, continued to worship at the other places that he had built, rather than in the temples they had been commanded. Then I'd like to go to Luke 19:1-10. This is about Zacchaeus. We're all familiar with Zacchaeus. He was a corrupt tax collector for Rome. Well, these weren't Romans, they were Hebrews, but they bid on the job. And in their bid, they would tell the Romans what they would collect. And whoever said they would collect the most funds for the Roman government got the bid. Of course, what made them so corrupt was the fact that anything they collected over the tax amount was theirs. So many of them, by skimming off the top, got very rich. Jesus entered Jericho, was passing through, and Zacchaeus wanted to see him. But he was short of stature. He couldn't see a crowd, so he climbed a sycamore fig tree. When Jesus reached the spot where Zacchaeus was, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. Another thing I've often wondered is, other than just the man Jesus, not the God, who's an all-knowing, how did he know Zacchaeus? You may have seen a guy up in a tree, but anybody have any ideas what kind of knowledge he may have had of it? I kind of thought Zacchaeus might have been so bad that he had such a bad reputation that Jesus knew it by reputation, because it goes on about what a corrupt tax collector he was. After having dinner with Jesus, Zacchaeus realized his sin and he confessed. In verse 8, it says, "But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, 'Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount.' Jesus said to him, 'Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost.'" If we go on to John 8:1-11, we find the story about the woman accused of adultery. One day when Jesus was teaching in the temple, the scribes and Pharisees brought a woman before him and said she was an adulteress, had been caught in the act, and wanted to stone her. They wanted to stone her according to the law of Moses. This wouldn't go over too big with the Romans, because according to the Roman law, they were not allowed to execute people. They weren't allowed to stone or use capital punishment. So if Jesus approved her stoning, he'd be in conflict with Roman law. If he didn't, he would be in conflict with Mosaic law. Actually, the scribes and the Pharisees could care less about the law or the woman. They were just trying to entrap Jesus. But Jesus bent down and started to write something on the ground with his finger. They kept on questioning, harassing him. He straightened up and said, "Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again, he stooped and was writing on the ground. I imagine by this time the crowd had scattered. They didn't want any part of this. And the Pharisees and the scribes wandered away until there was only the woman standing there with Jesus. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "So." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." I always thought it'd be interesting to know what Jesus was writing on the floor. I always wondered if a few of those people standing around real close, looking real pious, started writing that name. That's very interesting. Anyway, here we have another example of forgiveness and a second chance. Everyone needs forgiveness. In fact, I think forgiveness is a precursor to a second chance. If you're not forgiven, or if you do not forgive, it would be hard to receive or to give a second chance to someone. Luke 15, 11:32, we read about the prodigal son. We're all familiar with this one. I had two younger brothers. When I was 17, being totally blessed by God with the life I had had that far. Wasn't a whole lot. But anyway, I was out on my own. God bless me. I never had to go back home and ask my parents. I had two brothers, and they were always getting something from my parents. And for a long time, I have to admit, I had a problem with this story because they didn't return, and I didn't ask for anything. And it was, I heard a sermon on it one time that really lit up for me. I don't know why I was so blind before. That was just how it kind of affected me. As the story goes, very rich man had two sons. The younger son said, "I want my inheritance now, and I'm going out to enjoy myself." So the father conceded. He gave him his inheritance, and he squandered it pretty quickly with wine, women, so on. He was down so low that he was taking care of pigs. And for a Jewish fellow, this would have been pretty low. He was just wishing that he could just have the grain, whatever was being fed to the pigs. And he thought, the servants of my father have a lot better off than I had. I don't like to go home and just be a servant. That's all. He went home, was well received, killed a fatted calf, went to have a feast. The older brother became angry. This is the first and refused to go in to the feast. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you. I've never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home and you kill the fatted calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found." His father had forgiven him and given him a second chance. We need to give others a second chance. In Matthew 18, 21 and 22. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? 7 times? He thought 7 was probably a pretty good number. It was a safe number to use. But Jesus answered, "I tell you not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Most Bibles up to the, as far as I know, up to the New NIV edition. We'll say 70 times 7. In the New Revised Standard Edition, it says 7. There'll be a little difference in the translation. Maybe they have found a deeper understanding of the words used for these numbers, and maybe not. When the criminal was dying on the cross next to Jesus, he asked him to remember him. And Jesus responded by saying that he was seated in paradise. In Matthew 6:15, but if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive you. In Ephesians 4:32, likewise, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as God forgave you. In 2 Samuel, we read about David and his great sin with Bathsheba. He saw the woman bathing, he lusted after her. He had her taken to his room, and she conceived a child. Now they're in trouble. Her husband Uriah was one of David's commanders. He was out fighting in battle. So he brought him home on leave, hoping that he would speak with his wife and they could cover it up that way. Uriah was an honorable man who said he wasn't going and sleeping in his bed whenever his troops were out in the field. And it's when we're at war. This plan upset, David arranged to have him killed. He was deliberately killed in battle, and whenever his death came, the news of his death came, why? David took Bathsheba to be his wife. And they tried to hide the sin of the pregnancy as well. But again, we have the phrase, had done evil in the sight of the Lord. He had knowingly seduced another man's wife, committed adultery with her. He cheated on his own wives. Now, you could have many wives back then, you just couldn't have some other guy's wife. He tried to pass off his child onto another man. He plotted the murder. He lied to the nation about the entire affair. He could have been punished by losing his crown up to him and Bathsheba being killed. But God sent the prophet Nathan to him and told him what was going to happen. There would be violence and trouble in his house because of what he did. His wives would be taken away from him just like he took Uriah's wife. And God would take the baby at infancy. David responded to God by acknowledging his sins and regretting his actions. He mourned deeply for the baby that was born sick. When the baby died, the mourning period was over. He was allowed to take Bathsheba as his wife. They gave birth to a son and named him Solomon. Here is another chance of somebody doing something just as grievous as what you could ever think of. They received forgiveness and a second chance. Then we can go back to the very beginning and see how all this started. In Genesis 3:1-13, God said, "What have you done?" Adam and Eve had been placed in the Garden of Eden in paradise. They came to the animals, so they could garden a little bit. The other thing was they were not supposed to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Satan took the form of a snake, convinced Eve that that would make her as smart as God. It's not going to hurt you, so she took a bite. I guess she liked it. She gave it to Adam. I guess he liked it. Then they realized that they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together. In the cool of the evening, God was walking in the Garden of Eden. He was looking for Adam. He didn't find her, so he calls out to Adam. And Adam answered that he was hiding. Why are you hiding? He said, because I'm naked. Well, how do you know you're naked if you didn't eat from the tree of knowledge? So immediately, Adam's going to get out of this. He blames it on his wife. That woman you gave me and me eat some of the fruit. God did really buy that story. And we all know he kicked him out of the garden. And this is when he asked, what have you done? You were set up perfectly. That's it. Salvation is a second chance from the Lord. This is our second chance from Adam and Eve. John 3:16 and 17. And I like to read 17 because I think 16 is complete. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Verse 17. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. If you don't remember anything else that I said tonight, I'd like for you to remember that when it comes to God, we cannot run out of second chances. We can only run out of time. Most gracious Heavenly Father, we come to this gathered in your name, Lord. Lord, thank you for this time we've had this time. Father, we pray that everything that was said and done here tonight was to your glory. Lord, we ask you to be with us, guide us, protect us, save us from our sins in Jesus' name. In Jesus' name. I grace everything. Everybody turn around and wait for the camera. Megan's going to get you off.